I want to talk about Susan Griffin's Red Shoes and Albert Goldbarth's After Yetzel. These are examples of what are sometimes called braided essays. Sometimes the term would be double vantage point, but that doesn't work so well for these essays necessarily because, well, in the case of Goldbarth's essay, the vantage point isn't double, it's probably quadruple. So, braided is probably a better way to talk about these particular kinds of essays. Well, what is a braided essay? It's an essay in which there are at least two different points of view that are woven together in fragments. So, you might begin with one, let's say, an individual um, narrative, a first person narrative about an event in your life. That could be one braid. And then you might have another braid in which you think about your particular experience from a psychological point of view, or a philosophical point of view, or a religious point of view. And that would be another braid. And what you would do is you sort of interchange these two different perspectives on your experience, the first person and the more scientific, let's say. You would interchange them at a rhythm, at a pace, too, that seems to suit your subject matter. In the case of Griffin's essay, Red Shoes, we have two vantage points. We have Griffin giving her personal history of her relationship primarily with her grandmother, and this history is rendered in italics. We will get a paragraph that describes a moment in her history with her grandmother, and then we will get in another paragraph right after that a non italicized philosophical meditation on, say, gender, or reason versus emotion, or fiction versus essay. And then we get another italicized rendering of personal history. And so the essay goes, alternating between italicized personal history, non italicized philosophical meditation on the ideas that are pertinent to that personal history, until we get to the very middle of the essay. And then there's this shift where suddenly the personal history is rendered in non italicized language, and the philosophical meditation on the personal history is rendered in italicized language. Quite breathtaking, I think. And what does this do? Well, this shift shows us that maybe the general philosophical meditation and the highly personal rendering are in some ways interchangeable. Each is a legitimate way to understand reality. That's one way to think about it. The other way is to think of it this way: if the italicized script suggests a kind of lyrical emphasis that the non-italicized doesn't, we get that the first part of the essay, that personal history, which is about roses and ink and shoes, very intense lyrically, that's appropriate to be rendered in italics. And the more traditional philosophical meditation would be rendered more appropriately non-italicized. To shift that suggests that there can be a lyricism to the philosophical, and there can be an analytical power to the personal. And indeed, the piece is all about how the personal might actually be more powerful as a literary genre than the fictional. So I'm just giving you a few ways into that essay, but it is a braided essay with a double vantage point in this particular fashion. Most obviously, we are looking at an experience from a personal point of view, and then again from a more abstract point of view. So a more particular point of view and a more general point of view. Well, After Yetzel by Goldbarth is more complicated in terms of its braiding. We have one level of the essayist, the I of the essay, starting out in what seems to be the present moment in bed with his lover or his wife. And then he says, but you know what? I really also existed a long time ago in this small European Jewish community, and I married a woman named Mishula, and we seemingly escaped the Nazis and made our way over to America. So there are those two temporal levels, the present and the past, but interwoven with these temporal levels are these various moments of the speaker, the I in the present seemingly, talking about different ways that people construct a past, construct a genealogy. Edward Casey, the Mormons, all these extreme examples of how people need to construct a past to make sense of their present, and how truth is utterly secondary to the need to understand your identity in connection to a past. So I would say that those little anecdotes that run throughout, often accompanied by meditations from the I, we can call them Goldbarth, would create a third strand. And interestingly, a fourth strand occurs, uh, well, doesn't occur, is revealed at the end of the essay, where the I of the essay says, you know, that you I was talking to at the beginning wasn't necessarily my lover, it was actually you, audience. So imagine me right now, he says, writing this essay. So this gives us a meta level of imagining Goldbarth not as a character in the essay, but as outside of the essay writing the essay. And therefore, in some ways, in being where we are right at that point in the essay while reading it, but also out of the essay and being ourselves. So that meta level suggests a level of interpretation that goes beyond the matter of the essay to a consciousness that can kind of rove over and around the essay and pick and choose as it will, pick which strand it wants to follow, emphasizing one or the other. What does the braided essay do? Well, I think at least three things, and I'm presenting this to you not only with these examples, but also presenting to you what I'm going to call the rhetoric of the braided essay, how it might affect readers, and encouraging you to think about trying such a technique with your own essays. So the braided essay, obviously, at the very beginning, very obviously, the first point to be made is that the braided essay allows us to look at a single subject from more than one point of view. So there's a variety of perspective created. And this variety of perspective can help us to understand the subject of the essay in a wider and a deeper way. If I'm just looking at a particular daffodil, say, well, that's one understanding. But then if like 5 other people come and look at that daffodil and I ask them, well, how do you see the daffodil? Suddenly these 5 different versions, which may not necessarily agree with each other, at least give us a sense that there's a complexity and a subtlety and nuance there with this daffodil is worth exploring. Secondly, with the braided essay, you can create tension. The different braids talk to each other. The different braids usually come in what feel like fragments. Oh, here's a personal fragment, here's an abstract fragment, and you can generate tension that goes beyond plot, just based on structure. Just just in the same way that a filmmaker who uses montage by setting 2 images that seem unlike side by side can generate a third thing through that tension. So you're placing these 2 or 3 or 4 points of view together. You're constantly generating through the tension other points of view, not just their particular relationship, but a third term, which is the description of their relationship. So variety and tension you can create through the braided essay. But also, finally, I would say you can, with your essay, perform the way we actually think. Well, you can approach the way we actually think. Because let's face it, we generally don't think in a linear fashion. We think in a non-linear fashion. An idea pops into our head, and that may bring a certain image with it, which may bring a certain memory with it, which may generate another image or another thought. In other words, we think in this kind of fluxional, fragmentary fashion. We think in fragments, in ephemeral fragments. And to write an essay composed of fragments that are set side by side in interesting ways can dramatize, at least partially. Of course, we can't capture exactly how we think in language, but can dramatize how thought often actually moves, and that can make for exciting writing because you're pulling your reader in not just to a particular subject that you're exploring, but into the way your mind is actually moving, or the way a mind moves, and that can make for really dynamic, fascinating writing and reading. So those are some thoughts on the braided essay.